Ahoy, everyone. This is David Eugene Perry with my continuing series of interviews with writers, authors, and, well, just darned interesting people. And today in the Zoom room with me is retired Air Force Captain Julian Adrian Moss Jr. Captain, welcome to the show.
Thank you, sir.
Well, now, before we start, you told me an interesting story about what your rank was and how you got it.
I was in for 3 years and I left the service as a first lieutenant. And about 6 years later, I received in the mail, "We're sorry to tell you that you are still in the service, but under due circumstances, we have promoted you to a captain. You will not receive any payment for this time and grade. If you wish to have a discussion, please call this number." And that was
So in typical military parlance, kind of FUBAR, correct?
I would think a very large FUBAR, yes.
Well, Captain, it's a delight to meet you. I have read your wonderful book, and now my viewers are going to learn all about it and buy it. It's called On a Wing and a Prayer. And Captain Moss, your book and the way you tell it about this fascinating experience is, to me, the best of good old military stories. So I'm going to let you talk to our audience about that. What was the impetus for the book and why the title?
I did the action that was in the book, and several years later I was thinking about it, and I remember Robin had a copy of the article that was in the Phoenix Gazette. The lady who was in the action with us was a newspaper lady, and she wrote this article. So I went to Robin, and she found the Gazette copy for me. Thank you, Robin. And then we started talking about it. I said, "Read it again. I haven't heard it in many years." And I said, "Oh, you ought to hear the good part." So I started telling her the good part. She says, "Dad, we've got to put it down on paper."
Well, of course, now the Robin to whom you're referring is your lovely daughter, Robin Ross Manning, who I know very well from her creative work here in the Coachella Valley and around Palm Springs. And I know that she's there directing you just off camera, as they say, noise is off. So
it's normal. She is deeply involved. Yes, sir.
So real quickly, because I don't want to spoil the book for people who I want to make sure to buy it and read it after this, but in your own words, tell us about this incredible airborne adventure and how it started, and who was the woman journalist aboard who ended up writing this story?
What's her name?
I'll look it up. You just start talking.
It began on just a morning I went to work, and it just all exploded that the military had agreed to take this very, very well-known newspaper lady around the world. She's going basically over to Europe and then Japan. I can't see it.
Esther Clark.
And so her name is
Esther Clark.
Right. And Esther was just a phenomenal lady. I knew nothing about her. I was in the dark the whole way, and being all the other B-25 pilots were off the base, I was the only one left. So they said, "Here, you've got to do this. You've got to fly her to McGuire Air Force Base in New Jersey, and you have to be there in 2 days."
Now, what year was this, and from which base did you take off, Captain?
I was at Luke Air Force Base right outside Phoenix, Arizona, and this was in 1907. 1957.
So what was the atmosphere like in 1957 for you as an Air Force officer? I mean, this was during the Cold War.
It's a total different time element. It was an element that, being in the service, in the military service, in any one of them, was really nice. It was good. People liked it. They were supportive. They helped you. It was just amazing. The atmosphere as of today, it's not quite that glorious. It isn't quite that desired. People don't look up to it. But in the book, as I showed, several people came to my aid and bailed me out of a couple of really interesting problems.
Yes, well, now I don't want to give away the book because it is a fascinating tale of, well, what could go wrong on that flight did, and it didn't only go wrong once or twice, but I think at my count, it went wrong about 4 times.
Approximately, yes. It seemed, flying the plane, it seemed like more.
Yeah. Was there ever a point in this journey, which went on, as I recall, for 2 or 3 days, including stops and whatnot? It wasn't a direct flight right now like it would be from Phoenix to New Jersey in a few hours.
Well, the total flight was 6 days.
6 days. Was there ever a point during this odyssey where you thought, I've got to just stop, get another pilot, get another plane, or turn around?
Well, there was one I thought we wouldn't get out of trouble, and I won't tell the story, but we got into a mess and in Monroe, Louisiana, if I can say that, and I didn't see any way out of it. But having done again with somebody who was in the military and a unbelievable colonel, he pulled something out of the dark that I never thought would happen, and he shouldn't have done it. But in the back of it, he had to do it to save his end of the bargain too. So it was
right.
really interesting to watch it all come together.
Yeah, well, I mean, I was not in the military. I was in military school, and I have veterans in my family, and supporting veterans affairs is something I'm very dedicated to. I recently became a member of the Benevolent Order of the Elks. And one of the charities to which the Elks is dedicated is Veterans Affairs. So I'm looking forward to people such as me who are fascinated by these sort of stories, reading your book. But it does show to me the fraternity, and in some cases the sorority, the family that is the U.S. military. I mean, you got pulled out of several scrapes on that momentous flight by people who just said, this is a fellow serviceman, I'm going to come to his aid.
Wow, very true. And I'm not sure how that works today. I haven't been in the military for a day or two, and I don't know how it is, but it was really interesting and enjoyable. I had a wonderful time in my time in service.
So once this flight was over, when did you start thinking, this might be newsworthy? Was it just years and years later after you dug up that article that you thought there's a book here?
I really never thought of it being newsworthy. And again, my support clause, Robin, she said, Dad, we've got to do this. And I said, I don't think this is that big a deal. But as we talked and we dug into all the crooks and crannies of it, it became a good-sized deal. So it was what carried us on.
So tell me a little bit about your history. Where were you born and raised, and how did you come to be a member of the United States Air Force?
I was born in Indio, California in 1931, and came to Riverside, California in 1938. You went there through the schools, into the junior highs and high schools, and then I moved from there down to San Diego and went to San Diego State College, where I was about to get drafted, but I went into the Air Force ROTC. And when I graduated from college, I also graduated being a lieutenant in the service, in the Air Force. And from there...
And during that, I'm sorry, Danny, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Captain. Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
What I was going to say was, at that time, was it the United States Air Force, or was it still the Army Air Corps?
No, at that time it had turned to the United States Air Force.
So how many years in total did you serve in the Air Force?
Years.
Wow. So of all the memories, leaving aside the wonderful book, On a Wing and a Prayer, do any events or memories or recollections stand out that were especially enjoyable or bring a smile to your face about your years in the Air Force?
I had a few. Some of them, there was one very outstanding one, and it was not a smile, it was a death fear, but it really brings a thought back to my one I'm not sure I really want to talk about a whole lot, but I lost my engine on takeoff and hit the trees at the end of the forest, and then I had to land it. So it was a very interesting experience.
Yeah, well, there sounds like there may be another book there somehow.
Anyway,
I'm sure you have seen here in Palm Springs that the wonderful restored World War II vintage aircraft that fly out of the Palm Springs Air Museum. Have you ever flown up in any of them?
oh, I haven't flown out in any of them, but I've been there several times. Very enjoyable.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about the plane you flew, the story of which is recalled in A Wing and a Prayer. For our Air Force and plane buffs out there, they want to know what this plane was that it resulted in this 6-day odyssey across the country.
Well, it was a B-25, well known, and is an old type airplane actually used in World War II and probably built somewhere in the late 30s on paper, called a Billy Mitchell. And the Billy Mitchell was a General Mitchell, and then they made this named an aircraft after him, and it became a very steady, solid little bomber. Well, as the wars came through and World War II was over, then they took all the gunnery out of it, and they covered it up with different types of material so that it could fly good. They put seats in it, and it became a moving bus. I have called many people in it. I took all the seats out, and I used to haul tires because we were in great need of tires for our jet aircraft. We got 7 tires a landing, so we were already running out of tires. But it was just a good old solid plane, and she was sure forgiving.
Are there any still flying today that you know of?
I'm quite sure there is. I'm quite sure there is. I see in all the air shows there will be 1 or 2 in their rebuild, all refurbished. They all have new engines. They've all been redone inside and out. But they're just a good, solid airplane. Flies a lot of good weather. Does a lot of things that not all the planes can do. But it's also not too fast.
Right. Is that a key to what you think may have gotten you through these really 6 harrowing days that I think a lot of the people who were with you in that experience didn't know how harrowing it was? Are there planes nowadays that can take the sort of punishment that plane did? And does it have something to do with the fact that it flies at a slower speed?
Well, I think the whole aircraft industry has changed because we're looking at all high-speed, high internet jets that are all radio incidents with the pilot and with the engineering students who become pilots. It's really a whole different way of flying, and there's not much need to go slow. Mm-hmm. So from the military standpoint, they want to get there, go high, far, and fast. But the volume of pilots are cut down considerably because of the requirements.
So what is the most modern or contemporary aircraft you've ever flown?
I've flown Cessnas. I've flown C-45s, which is an old type. It's not near as new. And that's about all I've flown, because when I got out of the Air Force, I didn't have a need to fly. And gasoline was expensive, and flying from Riverside to San Diego for a cup of coffee wasn't the smartest thing I ever did. And if I took the boys to a flight over to Las Vegas, I couldn't have a drink. I had to go to bed early, get up and go check the plane, get them out of bed, put them in the airplane, fly home. That wasn't much fun. So I couldn't find a good reason to keep flying. So I shut it off and went back to work with my dad.
Got it. And at what point did you retire to write books?
I retired when they sent me the letter, "You're no longer needed." And I think that was somewhere when I turned 65, something like that.
Got it. Well, in our last few minutes, is there anything you would like to say about the book? Or also specifically, my last question is, any advice to any young pilots out there that are going to read this book and say, gosh darn it, how did Captain Moss do that?
Well, I was so involved. I had no idea about this lady, and she was Esther Clark. And we've left a little part in the very back of the book. You can look her up. She was so outstanding of a lady newspaper in those days again, And there were very, very few, if any, women I've ever heard of go into the type front lines area and do the things she did. And she just had a lot of intestinal fortitude. She would just go into areas of generals' bases, and she would go test their food, and she would not write a very pleasant article about them in next day. So all the military managers, if you wish, from all phases of not just the generals and colonels, but they were all, don't let her get to us. Is she coming? Oh my golly, what are we going to? Everybody was excited and very. So I had the wonderful time of becoming very close to her when I got back, and she and I became very good friends. And her husband was a paraplegic, and she flew all over the world doing her inner military to the civilian type phrase. It was just most interesting, just a very, very nice lady. But she was the first in a submarine. She's the first off an aircraft carrier. She did, and there's quite a lot I didn't even put in the book, but you can look this up of what she did. She has since passed away, and but she was fun to be on the trip. Just was a very ladylike. Boy, did she go a lot of places.
Well, for this interview, I'm sure there are people who may have read and heard about the legacy of Esther Clark. I've now since read about her because of your wonderful book, but there are people that may have never heard about Captain Moss. And I know now they're going to want to read this story about you and this very unique, memorable 6-day flight with Esther Clark. It's been a great joy speaking with you, Captain. I know there are a lot of people out there, military, retired military, people who just love aircraft, that'll be fascinated by your book. The book is called On a Wing and a Prayer. It's by Captain Moss, and I hope you will pick up a copy. Captain, a real pleasure.
Thank you, sir, very much for your time. Appreciated.